working at a startup can be a great place to not only, try to see if you can hack it yourself, but also find people in the future that you're going to go off and, create a business with. We literally got 75% of our first million in sales by cold emailing people. And then having some of those cold email people be like, no, man, not a fit, but I appreciate the hustle. All acquisitions are hype based. So there's just enough hype around the company where it goes, this isn't based on financials or fundamentals. This is literally based on like, what does the founder need to stop working on this company?
You know Chris Bakke from your news feed, along with millions of other founders that see his viral content every single day. But what you may not know is that last year, Chris sold his startup Laskie to Elon Musk for over $70 million. And that wasn't his first exit. His previous company, Interviewed, got acquired by Indeed back in 2016 for over $50 million. Chris has shared with us a bunch of his strategies that he used to go from 0 to 2.5 million in ARR with Indeed and 0 to over 5 million ARR with Laskie. He's got a ton of lessons for us. This was an amazing conversation. I think you're really going to enjoy learning behind the scenes what goes through Chris's mind as he's building these startups, how he thinks about crossroads and big decisions, about pivoting or changing strategy, and how to be creative and relentless to not give up on watching your revenue grow. Speaking of revenue, I want to share with you my company, Fondo, where we help founders like Chris and many others, over 1,000 companies, track their revenue, track their expenses, get their financial reporting regularly, and put their corporate taxes on autopilot. If you need any help with your taxes or bookkeeping, we'd love to support you. And without further ado, let's jump into this amazing episode. Awesome, Chris. So yeah, I would love to hear, actually, I've known you for a while, but I actually have never asked you your origin story. So would love to hear kind of like, where did you grow up, and start with that.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm a Bay Area native, one of the rare ones, I guess. I don't know. I was born down in San Jose, but grew up, lived there through elementary school, and then kind of grew up mostly in Colorado. So that's where my parents are. And yeah, it was awesome. And then came back to California for college, hated college, was excited to stop spending a bunch of money on student loans and all that kind of stuff. And so I was like, I need to start making money. And so I went into, I actually went into private equity for a year. Not many people know this because I don't put it on my LinkedIn, because it was a dark and embarrassing time. It felt like being like the low man on the totem pole, like a small private equity firm in Los Angeles. And I really just didn't like that. I thought like, oh man, this is what work is going to be. You just go into this like fancy office in Beverly Hills. I had to wear like a collared shirt every day.
Yeah.
Like suit and ties a lot of days. And yeah, I was just like, and I had my own office. I was like 21. It was like insane. I was like, this is like a weird dystopian Mad Men-esque version of what the world is like. And I remember this like very specific turning point. I think people hear private equity, by the way, and they're like, dude, you had it made. And it's like, no, I think now, especially on more of like the quantitative side of PE, there's, and certainly in like hedge funds and trading, there's people who are 21 and 22 that make crazy money. I was making like 50K a year base. And just like, I was literally like working 7 rungs below a guy who was a billionaire. And I remember after working there for a year, and he was like really mean to me. He was like hanging these like Andy Warhol paintings in his office.
Real Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol paintings like hung or like rehung in his office while he was like bitching at me about something. And I was just like, I need to A, get out of here, and B, like find some way to start making real money. Cause like this guy kind of has the life, even though he's mean, and I definitely don't. And I can't spend like 30 years like in PE, like working my way up the ladder. And so luckily I had a friend who literally like got me into technology. So like one day I just gave notice. It was like one of those like gave notice on a Friday, and then like 2 weeks later was like moved up to San Francisco working at a tech startup. So it just all sort of happened through random personal connections there. But
Wow.
yeah, it was a humbling origin story for sure. And it sort of made me grateful that like, it's okay to work really hard in tech, because at least there I was, making more money, and I felt like enjoying the work. So
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because when you're in PE, you're working like crazy hours, right? And
Yeah.
were you working on like deals
Yeah.
and doing sort of like, were you doing like the modeling or the decks or everything?
Bit of everything, a lot of modeling. We were the big deal that I worked on was this is during the financial crisis, so we were buying companies that were failing left and right in Los Angeles, and American Apparel was failing, and
Oh man,
they my one of I actually spent like a month and a half driving to like the garment district in Los Angeles and sitting in like a parking lot across the street and counting the number of cars that came in and out of the American Apparel factory because my boss thought that like Dove Charney was bullshitting about how many garments that they were producing. So he basically backed into some modeling around like, here's how many
wow.
t-shirts one worker can make. Here's how many workers are showing up for each shift. We can basically estimate sales because of that. But I was like, that sounds awesome to like retell that story, but it sucked in practice. Like,
That's like
like you just
that's
literally
like.
sit there and count cars, and I was like, wait, this is life? I don't know.
So you were a car counter in a
It was a
previous
car
life.
counter. I was a car counter, and then take all that stuff at night and like put it into Excel spreadsheets, and yeah, that was the start, man.
That's like the do things that don't scale origin.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah,
Do you think that like, I mean, it feels like that sort of like builds some muscle to like do shitty things or like to realize
yeah,
that shitty things exist and that you can do a lot of work towards them. Did that,
yeah.
did that inform any of your like, going into startups after that? Like, was that helpful in any way?
I think it was in the sense of like I was fascinated with the kind of grunt work that went into private equity behind the scenes. Like it seems pretty glamorous. Like it seemed very glamorous of like, wow, I get to work at this like pretty prestigious firm and I get to dress up like an adult every day and I get like my own parking spot and it's in Beverly Hills and ooh, this is all fancy. And then like you work in there for a week and you're like, wow, this sucks. But I think the sort of like guerrilla marketing stuff of like you're counting cars to estimate a company's revenue, or I went around. We were trying to buy this. We were trying to buy like a company that produced commercial laundry machines, and so for like 3 weeks, I just drove around like the outskirts of Los Angeles and I would just go into different dry cleaners with like a fake dry cleaning shirt that I needed to drop off. Like, hey, I want to like set up a new account. And then I would just be talking to these like immigrant dry cleaning owners about like, yeah, what machines you got back? Like, I was just like, so it's like, there's a lot of scrappiness to that of like, okay, you can actually get in the weeds and you can sort of learn things by just going out into the world and like nothing stopping you in that way. And I think because my first foray, excuse me, into startups was like through sales, and like being an account executive at a startup, I kind of tried to take that same scrappiness. Like, cool, if somebody doesn't answer their email, like just give them a call. And if somebody doesn't call, like just be like, I'm going to fly to your city and meet with you until you sign this deal. And so I kind of worked at a company that encouraged that grittiness and that scrappiness. And we were selling into, real estate professionals. This is like 15 years ago. And so it felt a lot more guerrilla, like grounds up in terms of the things that you're able to do to make money in startups, even though I think the rest of the startup ecosystem, even at that time in like 2010, 2011, had definitely started to converge toward this model of like companies have SDRs and the SDRs place phone calls to get demos and the AEs run the demos. Like at the startup I was at and that I started my career at, it was just like, you do everything. You find your own leads. You might be calling the same leads as the guy next to you. It's kind of chaotic shit show, but like the goal is just to get them to close a deal. And so kind of do whatever you have to do to get them to close. There was no like real formal sales training. And so I'm grateful for that. Like I think if that's the life of a founder, right? Like if I would have started as a SDR at, IBM or Salesforce or something, like I wouldn't have gotten that same like gritty, scrappy experience, which is important.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, that's because you've been really successful in building your startups, and it's like that sort of foundation sounds like it was really helpful.
Yeah. for sure.
So when you were doing sales at Rent Juice, then you guys got acquired by
Yeah.
Zillow, right?
Yep.
And then from there, you went on to be an executive at another real estate startup, 42 Floors.
Yep.
And you did a lot of like founder-led sales there, right? I know you were really early, maybe not necessarily the founder, but you did the founder. You brought them from like zero to revenue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What was that? How was that like?
A funny story of like, yeah, that first startup, like you said, got bought by Zillow. I stayed at Zillow for a little bit. Left Zillow because I was dating one of my coworkers who I eventually got married to. But it was like kind of like it felt fine actually in a weird way. Like it felt fine that we were dating at a startup. It kind of felt weird. Like Zillow had recently gone public. It kind of felt like there's like actual HR here. I don't know. And so I was just like, one of us should probably leave. I think you have a much better and longer career here. Like I'm gonna bounce eventually anyway. And so I lasted like a year and then moved to 42 Floors. And 42 Floors was another like just incredibly ambitious team that I think got like so many things right and kind of got some timing things wrong and a bunch of stuff right and wrong. I think like any startup does, but that was like a very formational time. And I started there in like 2013, I think. So about 12 years ago, but it was my first time sort of being fully responsible for lots of stuff, like doing sales at a startup, doing sales, in sort of early days of Zillow was scrappy and whatever, but it was a singular thing that I had to focus on. I joined in this sort of like vague biz ops role to be like the first sort of non-technical person at this company after they had already raised like 20 some $million. And this is back in 2012, 2013. So that's like a crazy round by 2013 standards. And so it was like, we've raised 22 million from top VCs. We have like three pretty legendary people on our board: Jeremy Levine from Bessemer, a couple of the NEA guys, Jared Kushner was on the board. So it was like Josh Kushner was on the board. He was just starting Thrive at that point. So it was like a crazy company, crazy learning experience, got to be in all the board meetings and just see like, okay, now outside of just like selling this product, I get to see sort of the full end to end of like, how do we come up with an idea? How do we go to market with it? Like, how do we price this product? What's wrong with pricing this product? Partnerships, like all of these sort of like things that I think operators of companies have to think about. And so that was really fun. I think I was able to de-risk that experience a little bit. Like, I think if I would have just jumped right into starting a company, it wouldn't have gone so well because I wouldn't have seen, I needed somebody more experienced to like really be the founder and to sort of take like almost like a junior, like chief of staff sort of COO role where I got to be involved in a lot of those meetings and operations, but like it wasn't actually my show to fully run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I learned, very quickly, like most probably like 25-year-olds make pretty bad COOs of, companies. And so I don't know, it was just such like a formative learning experience. And then, yeah, I met actually both of my co-founders who I've started my sort of two companies with. They were engineers at 42 Floors. And so I think that that's another good lesson. Like it's a great, like working at a startup can be a great place to not only, try to see if you can hack it yourself, but also find people in the future that you're going to go off and, create a business with if that's sort of your goal. So.
And how did you come up with so after that you started Interviewed, and
Yep.
What was that? How did you come up with that idea?
Yeah, that was like a classic solving our own problems idea. So this story is kind of fun. Like part of my job when I came into 42 Floors was they had, first of all, the company had like seven or eight co-founders. I think one of the co-founders had left. So there were like seven co-founders remaining. One had already left. The origin story was like, it was a very strange setup, which I was not aware that like companies should probably not have like eight co-founders. But that's part of being naive and like just joining as like, sort of one of the early hires. And in part of that, what happened was almost all of the co-founders of the company were like very deeply technical. And so as we were hiring, as we were deploying this like, 20 some $million that the company had raised right before I joined, what we realized is that I think we were very good at hiring engineers and we were very bad at hiring everything else. And now I'll take full blame because like the CEO and CTO of the company were the co-founders and they were hiring all the technical people. And I was the COO. So I was supposed to be hiring all the non-technical people. And it's like, there was this distinct moment where after a year of being there, we like looked at our engineering team and we're like, these people are really good for the most part. We looked at sort of a lot of our like sales and customer support and like marketing and biz ops and data entry and all these other roles. And we're just like, we're just guessing like basically with these types of roles. And so my boss, Jason, the CEO, had asked me like, what you should do is go put like more rigor around this process of hiring. And it was interesting because at that time, like HackerRank and Codility and a bunch of these platforms were just coming out that we were using to go hire engineering and technical talent. And nothing like that really existed for sales or for customer support or marketing. And so we basically created like a HackerRank style company internally that we would use to like test the skills of like salespeople, like send an example, you know, cold email to a sample customer. And then like, here's an example of a pushback that we would receive. How would you respond to it? Give a demo of this like in 5 minutes. And so you would sort of have to go through all these tasks. And one of the engineers at the company, Darren, and I ended up basically like building this whole thing out in Google Docs. And another engineer, Daniel, who became our third co-founder, decided to like enter a hackathon with this idea. We won the hackathon. The judges gave us like 150,000. It's like, congrats on winning this thing.
Wow.
Like, where should we wire the money? And it was like, oh, we don't have a company. We're just at this YC company and we're doing this on the side. And Cyan Bannister from eventually Founders Fund was one of the judges, and she was like, you guys should really like do this as a company. And so it was, again, it was just like, all right, we all ended up leaving. The CEO is super supportive, like way more supportive than he should have been. Became an early investor, became an advisor to us, became like our second or third customer at the company. And the idea was,
Wow.
yeah, like build HackerRank for non-technical roles. And so we, you know, built that up to about 2.5 million in ARR over 2 or 3 years, and then sold it to Indeed in 2017.
Wow. That's awesome. And so after you win the hackathon and you guys are like, okay, we're going to incorporate the company. Like what did you do to get your first customer from there? It sounds like 42 Floors was already like, you know, probably in the pipeline, but like, how did you start that process to go from like, you know, winning the hackathon to actually getting a customer?
Yeah. Our first three customers in order were TaskUs. TaskUs is now a publicly traded company, but TaskUs then was like a pretty small operation of like 50 or 100 people in Los Angeles that were providing data entry services for 42 Floors. So I always think like, you know, it's obvious that you should tap your network. I think what was less, and this was all my co-founder, he was like, we should go look at all the vendors that we had at 42 Floors. We should figure out who's doing high volume hiring. And we should go to them and basically say, we just left 42 Floors. The team and founder are super supportive of our new thing. If you want them to continue paying you, you should check out this. It was almost this weird, like, you know, circular reasoning. But that's basically what it was. And the guys at TaskUs, Bryce and Jasper, it was like amazing. They were super young. They were like our age. They were like in their mid late 20s at that point, and we're just growing this like monster data entry company. They're now like 36 and 38 years old and have a company that IPO'd 4 years ago with 50,000 employees.
Wow.
So they went from like a couple hundred people in Santa Monica to like 40 or 50,000 people.
Thanks to Interviewed.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not anymore because I don't have any stocks. So there's no upside for me to say that. But thanks to me personally, I did it. So that was that. And then the second customer was super interesting. And I think this gets into this decision on where to put your company. We like many YC companies decided at this point, this is like 2015 when we started Interviewed. We went through YC in summer 15. We were looking at office space And office space in San Francisco in 2015 was hyper competitive. Like this was sort of the quick rise of all those like slow-mo companies, whatever they call it, like the social,
Yep.
local, global. So it's like every company is raising like $40 million rounds to go build the next Snapchat or whatever. And we're just like, we sell business to business, like hiring, assessment software. Like, can we have an office space, please? And we realized that like the office space we could afford for our like $1.9 million seed round was just going to kind of suck. So we ended up leasing this like really sick luxury apartment at like 9th and Market. It was
Nice.
like bad area, awesome apartment. And we built the entire company out of like this like luxury high rise building at 9th and Market.
Wow.
And
Was this
the
Nima?
second customer, I mean, like right around there was Twitter, Square,
Yes.
Uber,
Was this the Nima
Thumbtack
building?
was right there, Clever was right there. All of those guys became customers. They all did.
Wow.
Like within a year, we had Uber as a customer. Thumbtack was our second customer. Planet Labs, which is IPO'd, they were building satellites in the building across the street from us. It was just this like super dense ecosystem then of all these companies that were like much further ahead of us that had started 10 years prior that all were headquartered there. And that was not part of our logic at all. But it was like, I would just literally walk the streets. I remember vividly, like I just walked into Thumbtack's office and I like asked for Marco, who's the CEO, and like and the woman at the desk is like, no. And then I emailed him and I was like, dude, I just stopped by your office. I'm literally like a block away. Could we get some time to meet? Like the receptionist, like, wouldn't let me like meet with you. And he's like, yeah, dude, like come through. So it was just like founders
Wow.
being nice and open and like willing to like talk. And we did that same thing. Upwork was right nearby. They became our second largest customer. Planet Labs became like a big user. Uber became like a huge sort of power user on a trial. DoorDash was right there. DoorDash, when they were 15, 20 people, was using us. And so it was just like that's sort of the intangible element of like, I think where you put your company or where you are as a founder is, I think if we would have been in any other city at that time, we wouldn't have had the same run. And now arguably,
Wow.
I think that that's still true for, the sort of bull case on SF, but I think that there's plenty of other cities where that dynamic probably exists today. So,
Wow. And so what was the like sales process like? So it was literally door to door sales. Did
yeah.
you do it? Did you use a deck? Did you just sort of like pitch them and they were in? Like what were the sort of mechanical things that you had to do to close the deal?
Yeah, it was honestly a lot of like what felt like outside sales. It was all founder led. We didn't hire salespeople until the first maybe 1.2, 1.5 million in ARR. We hired our first two sales guys. But yeah, it was me just like trying stuff, like walking around the neighborhood, going through the crime and the chaos to these different offices and just being like, I think you could leverage the YC logo really nicely back then. It was still this kind of like very like niche. I was always like pleasantly surprised even in 2015. I was like, oh, people know what YC is and they kind of, respect it and they'll take meetings seemingly because of it. And there were other YC companies that were starting to get big like DoorDash and Clever and stuff that were Checker was right there taking meetings with us. Checker, I think, by the way, worked out of the same luxury high rise that we did. So they ended up clearly getting a better unit and building a better company. But yeah, everybody was right there. And so we would go door to door. We would send a lot of follow-up emails. I would
This was
say
before like HubSpot automation, right? So this was all like you were just grinding, finding their email by guessing or like just.
It's a good question. We used a tool. I'm not even sure if it's around anymore. We definitely used a tool called SalesLoft.
Yep.
And SalesLoft was like an early, it was sort of early like email template automation. I think that they would do like email verification. But yeah, like I definitely remember there was like a Trader Joe's 6 blocks away from where we were. We would cook all of our own food and I would like carry a notepad. And I remember, so this goes back to my real estate experience. One of the things I would do is carry a notepad and I would write down all the like big logos that we would like walk by on the way to this Trader Joe's. It was 6 blocks away. And I also just snap pictures of all of the like lobby plates. So you'd see like, here's who's on floor 1, floor 2, floor 3, floor 4. And then I would just use that to be like, we're nearby, take a meeting with us. And that was basically it. Like we literally
Wow.
got 75% of our first million in sales by cold emailing people, and then having some of those cold email people be like, no man, not a fit, but I appreciate the hustle. Like I appreciate it's funny that you stopped by our building and took a picture of the lobby plate and sent it to me. But like not a good fit for us. We're just not doing that much hiring. But my friend is like the head of recruiting at this other. So it was all like very serendipitous, but it was thousands and thousands of cold emails and just being super persistent to this pool of like, 1 to 200 companies that was in pretty close proximity to us.
Wow.
For at least like the
And
first million in sales.
and how did you think about getting to that million? Was it like were you setting like goals per month? Like how did you how did you set goals, or was it just like we're going to try to get as many customers as we can?
My co-founder Darren had a really good story about this, but I'll tell a slightly condensed version of it. So when we were at 42 floors, the company before, we had these like giant flat screen TVs like mounted in our office, and they would have all of our metrics, right? So they would have like, active users that day, active user minutes, revenue, all these different things. Um, After like all that stuff went up really quickly, and then it didn't, like it started plateauing, and some of the numbers even started going down after a year and a half, around the time that we were leaving. And around the time that we were leaving, uh, there was a guy who I won't name. I don't think he'll be listening to this, but there's a guy on our team who would like go around and he would like turn off all the TVs in the office. And I think we always thought like it's so weird, like these monitors just are like glitchy, they're not working, whatever. This guy eventually was just like, yeah, like I can't like walk around this office and like see all these depressing ass metrics every day. And so we made it like a very clear point that we were going to try to do the opposite. Like I think part of why 42 floors didn't become what it should have is we sort of like we just gave into the like depression, and we created new fake vanity metrics like, oh, revenue sucks, so we're not going to look at it anymore. We're just going to like hope that it gets better. We're going to focus on this other thing. So like revenue, for better or for worse, just became like the singular driving factor at Interviewed. We put up we got those like giant sticky notes that you can like, put on the wall for brainstorming. And we had those every month. And every month in like giant Sharpie, we would write like the month, we would write our monthly goal for revenue. And then we would write like whether we hit or missed it. And then we had this giant like bar chart in the office, like in the office being 2-bedroom apartment, right when you walked in, that would just always be on. We would always look at revenue. We definitely had months that were like flat or we had customers churn, but it was like, I was just personally obsessed with like, make that number go up. And if we can make that number go up, everything else will be solved. And I think that's, I think that there's a lot of flaws to that argument, but it's mostly true. So we were just like hyper obsessed with revenue growth. And that included like getting into, bigger and bigger deals, and eventually like sort of hiring out a sales team. But yeah, like nothing else really mattered. And I think that, if you are too revenue focused, there can certainly be like flaws in the product and a lot of other things that can catch up to you eventually. So I think it has to be a balance. But yeah, I was just like, we got to make this number go up. We got to make this. If we make the number go up, everything else will be fine. Like we had no like end game plan. It was just like, if the number keeps going up, it'll be okay. And if it keeps going down for a sustained period, we're screwed. That was it. It was very black and white.
And how big was the team at this point?
When we hit 1 million in ARR, we were 5 people probably. Like it was like me on sales, 2 of my co-founders who were both technical, and then 2 engineers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we had 6 at that point. But I mean, the team was super small. Like when the next hires, so we hit 1 million, maybe 1.2 million with a team of like 5. We added 2 more engineers, a sort of head of content, and 2 salespeople. But that was the entire team when we sold. So it was basically a team of 9 that got to 2.5 million in ARR, and then ended up being sort of the team that, joined Indeed and sort of continued to build the product there.
And what were sort of the inflection points between 0 and, 1 million in ARR where so it sounds like it was sort of like hardcore outbound by you,
Yeah.
sort of getting on the phone, getting in the inbox of these other founders of your target companies that you wanted to sell to, like by any means necessary. So showing up at their office, emailing them, how did that, and then, pitching them, how did that process change at each, like, what were the inflection points? Was it just that same thing that got you to 1 million?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the big inflection point that was a big unlock for us, and that I think, if we would have continued with the company, like I'm very glad that we sold, but I think that we probably sold prematurely. Like I think things were still growing up into the right fairly quickly. Like the big inflection point, I think for us that we were maybe just starting to figure out was conferences. And I think conferences and events just period are pretty depressing as a for sure a small like bootstrapped company, or basically any company that hasn't raised some hyper flashy round. Like you go to a conference, it's expensive. Like you're 10 grand for a booth, you fly everybody out there, there's another 10 grand in expenses, and you go, we got to get at least 50K out of this to have it be worth our time and our effort and our money. And just kind of everybody ignores you. And then I think like one of the advantages that I always tell founders about just like being in an industry and not selling the company is all those things start to compound over time. It's like everybody ignores you the first year, and like 99.5% of people ignore you the second year, and 99% of people ignore you the third year. But it's like, guess what? By year 3, 1% of people aren't ignoring you. Like the people that have seen you now at that trade show 3 times are like, oh, dude, I got to come up and say hi. Like I've seen your logo around. I've seen you guys with your badges or your shirts. Like, what do you guys do? And it's just, I think that that's everything with go to market. It is that repetition. And so it's kind of the same thing of like, I think back to the cold email, and it was just, I mean, I knew the number at one point, but it was just like when we sold the company, it was tens of thousands of cold emails that I had sent. And importantly, it was like tens of thousands to like 1,000 people. Like it was just like follow up, follow up, follow up, try new angle, try new thread. I just didn't know anything else. I had never run paid ads. I didn't know how to do SEO. So it was just like my like blind spots just sort of created our go-to-market strategy in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think as we started to get bigger deals through cold email, there was a for sure inflection point around, I don't know exactly, probably 500,000 to 1 million, where some of those customers, Planet Labs would be like, oh, are you going to go to the ASU GSV conference? And I'd just be like, yeah, man, we're going to be there. Wait, what is it? And because it's
That
like,
was a
I
great
just wanted to
conference.
feel connected to more of those types of companies. But we definitely tried a few events, and it was like around that 500,000 to 1 million mark. And we did start to see the payoff. Like by year 2, 2.5, it was like, now we're going to a couple of these events and everybody's still kind of ignoring us, but we're either having these like serendipitous moments where we're like sitting next to the right people at the breakfast, or we just, bump into the right analyst who writes a report about us in this like industry specific thing. And then that drives like Nike to reach out. Like just weird stuff like that happens, but it just doesn't happen overnight. And so I think that, luckily I had no idea what we were doing. So we just like blindly kept marching forward. But I think the lesson there was for sure, like, you can't write one LinkedIn post and have it go viral and drive a bunch of leads. You can't send one cold email and have it hit, and then everything goes well. You can't run one ad and have it be this magic moment. You can't go to one event. You can't throw one dinner. Like, you just have to kind of pick a thing, get a baseline signal of like, that went okay, but there's a lot we could have done better. And then just keep like repetition. And that lesson was like not taught to me until we tried some of these events. But basically it was that. I think like when we sold around 2.4, 2.5 million, 100% of the revenue was attributed to cold email and events and like conferences, basically. Yeah. It was a pretty like singular GTM strategy for a company that size.
Yeah. And so you had pretty clear product market fit from the beginning. Did you have to change the idea at all, or like change the value proposition, or was it clearly resonated from the beginning?
We did. I think it's funny. I mean, I think my most recent company, Laskie, probably had clearer product market fit in that, like, I think, the way I've heard this described, right, is like, if you don't have product market fit, you're like pushing the boulder uphill every day. You're just trying to reach the summit. You have no idea where the summit is. You're like, you got this boulder on top. It's painful in that way, right? Post product market fit is like you're chasing the boulder down the hill before it wipes out the village. And like my two companies felt exactly like that. Like it was very clearly like Interread was just like show up, send 200 cold emails, add 20 people on LinkedIn in a very manual way, send them all a personalized thing, go for a walk to Trader Joe's, take 6 pictures of offices, look them up on Google Maps, see if I can find the other tenants in the bit. Like it was just that grind for 2.5 to 3 years, including, I mean, I missed every 4th of July. I missed every Thanksgiving. I missed every, like, it was just like, I just did not stop. Like weekends I worked. I showed up 2 hours late to one of my best friend's weddings because I was actually like in a YC interview, but then we met some cool people at the YC office in Mountain View. My girlfriend, then fiance, then wife, somehow forgave me for that. I don't know if the friend ever did, but just like shit like that, like probably like went too far with it. But I think like you kind of have
Yeah.
to. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
It really
and so
does
the product
require
market fit
that.
side was like we kind of had it, but we were forcing it. Like nobody was coming inbound. Like we would get lucky on referrals, but it wasn't like, I don't think it was like close to HackerRank, where like HackerRank was probably like in demand from developers by year 2 or 3. I don't think we ever hit that.
Wow. So it's just such a grind. But there's like if you do it right, which includes like not giving up and like making sure that it works, there can be like a really amazing outcome at the end. And when your deal came together with Indeed, how did you approach that? Were you planning to be acquired? Were you planning a fundraise? How did that come about?
We were, I think, increasingly, I mean, there have been two very clear points at the ends of both of my companies, actually, where I just had like tremendous founder burnout for different reasons. And I think I've been historically like very bad at navigating that. Like one of the reasons I like doing stuff like this, or like working with founders one-on-one, is because like I think, if I can help save or get like 2 founders a year like through that burnout that I think we all face. So there was like then it's a win for me. Like there
Yep.
was just very clear sense 2.5 years in of like, um when I look back on it, we had this very clear light at the end of the tunnel because we had tons of super great Series A investors reaching out to us being like, dude, you guys have 2.5 million in revenue. This is great. We should do a Series A. But I just never, I think I was afraid to raise more money. Like I just had come from a company that had raised 20 some million pre-product market fit, pre-product, pre-revenue, and like saw that go very poorly. So I was just like, I don't really want to raise more. Indeed had been like a fantastic partner to us. Like they actually put in a small check in our seed round, and then they tested the products. They kept, testing it more. They eventually paid us for it. The amount that they were paying us kept going up. And I knew nothing. I mean, they knew what they were doing. They were like, we think on day one, we think we might want to buy this company. We should put in a small check so we get all their investor updates. Like now that's super clear. At the time I was like, wow, these guys really like us. Like they keep paying us more. And, ultimately then you get to a point where even though I was pretty dumb about it, I was like, oh wait, there is like real risk here. Like these guys are quickly becoming not only, 10% of the dollars that we raised in our seed round, they now want to lead our Series A. They've become like our second or third biggest customer. This could go bad if they like back out. Like there's real risk to that. And so it didn't feel in any way like we were like sort of cornered by them. But I think that when they came to us and they were like, hey, I mean, we're spending a couple $100,000 a year, and it looks like next year we might be spending $1 million a year out of your $3 million in revenue. Maybe we should just buy you. I was like, yeah, let's do that, because I was out. It just felt like there was no end in sight of like, when do we stop sending like thousands of cold emails? Like when does this become more enjoyable? There was no end in sight. And so it was very clear. It was very clear, I think, to all of us, like, yeah, this is a good time to do this, and a really good partner to sell to. So,
And what did that process look like? So you're in a meeting with your customer. They're like, "Hey, we should
yeah,
buy you." You're like, "All right." Who threw out the
it's
first number?
I think when you I was just at any given time, I'll like advise like 5 or 6 companies, and there's a company that I'm advising right now that's going through an M&A process, and the founders are very young, and it's their first company. And they reached out about like one of their partners who had sort of booked a meeting with them, and it was kind of an odd meeting, and they were asking about fun. And I was like, "Oh, dude, these guys want to acquire you." And they're like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is how it always starts. It's always like every big company, especially if it's a big public company, they all do the same dance. It's like, we want to learn more about you. Let's get lunch. Let's meet the rest of the team. Oh, where are you guys? How is revenue going?" It's like they don't actually care. Like this has nothing to do with their buying decision of buying your products. Like they want the company, not the service or not the product. And so this all started in November of 2016. The deal closed in August of 2017. So it feels very long. The actual M&A process was only, I think 40 or 45 days, but the circling for many, many months about like, oh, fly to Austin, come meet with our team. Oh, go to Japan, go meet these people. That went on for 7 months or maybe 6 months before they sort of put an LOI in hand. I think in May or June of 2017, we had an LOI. We spent a couple of weeks negotiating it. we did kind of a genius, maybe a shitty thing. I'm not sure. Still, I still recommend doing it, but I think we took the LOI and we went back to a bunch of Series A investors, and we were like, "Hey guys, I think we might want to raise a Series A, and we have this LOI in hand. We should just go raise a Series A, keep going," even though we didn't want to. So then we had this bidding war of Indeed put this like initial pretty low ball offer in front of us. I think I want to say it was like 18 or 20 million. And we went back to an unnamed prestigious VC firm, and we got them to agree to invest in us at a $40 million valuation. We went to another public company, and we're like, "Hey guys, we're about to close at a 40 million valuation for these guys. Would you guys pay 45?" And this other company was like, "Yeah, we'll pay 45." We went back to Indeed. We're like, "Oh my God, the price went up. We got to get 50." It totally worked. And so we ended up closing the deal for around like 50 million with them. But it was like a great way to double or more, 2.5x the initial LOI.
Wow.
And that whole process was in the course of, I think it was over a week, but it had to have been like under 10 days. Cause like I think we had 9 or 10 days to respond to the LOI. So like, I think you should negotiate. I think in my experience, almost always, especially if it's a bigger company, you can always triple the price. Their corp dev told us, because I was like, "Oh, we really got," like, after I'd worked at Indeed for a year, I was like, "Oh, we really got you guys on this price." And I remember one of the most painful things I've ever heard in my life was their head of corp dev telling us, "Yeah, but we were willing to pay a lot more." I was like,
Oh man.
we did, like,
Wow.
knowing that there was more money on the table and all you had to do was another like day of work to get it is excruciatingly painful, but it's okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really incredible. I mean, it's like as a founder, you're kind of in this, as a CEO, you're like trying to grow revenue, and then, things work out, you can sell the company, you've created enterprise value, and now like in 10 days you almost tripled the enterprise value
Yeah.
by this like one tactic. Which is just insane. I mean, that's like from 18 to 50 million by this one trick.
Yeah, this one trick. Doctors hate. Corp dev hates this one quick trick. Yeah.
The one trick that corp dev doesn't want you to know about. That makes sense though, right? I mean, it definitely gives you leverage, and obviously you built a great business that made you in a position that you could do that. But that's really interesting. And I think that's also interesting that they told you that they were willing to pay a lot more. Yeah. And so that benchmark, I think, is super helpful to think about. Like the first offer from a large strategic is usually 3 times less than what they can actually pay.
Yeah, I see it over and over. Like I just saw a deal get done again where I was a seed investor. The initial offer was 10. They closed the deal at 30. I think 3x is a pretty good rule of thumb. Where to a really big, like to a founder, depending on how you've capitalized the company, a 10 million, 20 million, 50 million, $100 million exit is life changing. I think one of the bittersweet things of both of the companies that I've sold in that price, like in that sort of $50 million price range, is like both Indeed and Twitter shut down all of the revenue day one. Like they wanted the team, they wanted the product. So it's so funny to like show up to work every day, literally like nights and weekends, sleeping at the office sometimes to get to 2.5 million. Like you said, you sort of do this one quick trick to get this, like to try to juice the enterprise value as much as possible. And then I, from a go-to-market perspective, am so proud of that, like that I basically single-handedly got to, $1 million or $1.5 million. And then with 2 other people, we got it to 2.5 within 6 months of that. Such like a prideful moment in my career. And I think it should be, but like also the bittersweetness is like, Indeed at that point was doing $3 billion in revenue per year, or 2.5 billion. Like it was literally like more work for them to have to transfer over like 80 contracts for $2.5 million in paper than it was worth. So they were just like, yeah, just like give notice to all your customers, or we're like discontinuing the service. And I was just like, like we'll pick it back up. We're going to rebuild the product within Indeed. We'll get all those guys back. But it was like, I don't know, will we? And we didn't, and they didn't care. It didn't matter. But I think that was like, maybe until you're like, depending on the buyer for sure, but until you're at, 10, 20, $30 million in revenue, there's a lot of companies that sell that have what I think you or I would even consider like, wow, this is meaningful revenue. 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million just doesn't matter to a lot of buyers. They're looking for something else. And so that's actually, I think, one of the hardest things about selling a company. It's just like, it is hard going back to customers that you've sort of promised, we're going to help you with this thing. And then you're like, sorry, we're like literally the definitions of a sellout. Good for us, bad for you. Like we're going to give you 30 days notice and discontinue this. I mean, that kind of sucks. And I think, there were definitely a couple companies that were like pretty upset by that at both, I think, selling Interviewed and Laskie. So, something to keep in mind, like if you're in it for the long run, you got to treat those like customer relationships as just as important as like acquirer relationships or, teammate or co-founder relationships, because the world is small. And like the last thing you want, especially in like creating another HR tech startup, is like, oh, Chris screwed us. Like like he did well by all of his investors. He did well personally, but he like screwed us on his last company. Like I wouldn't buy from him again. Like people change jobs every 2 years. It's like, there's only so much you can do, but I think that we probably should have been more like proactive in that deal to be like what can we do to give customers like a free year of access? Like if the money doesn't matter to Indeed, it doesn't matter. And so we should just try to do more to like do right by those customers. And that's like one of the few regrets that I think I had about that first process. But overall, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. So
yeah. And at this point in your journey, what did your Twitter look like? Did you have a Twitter account yet?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I signed up. So I did the typical rest invest thing out Indeed. Tried to see if I could work my way up through the ranks. Was not working particularly hard, but was actually learning a lot and having fun, and had like an incredible team of people, of PMs and designers and engineers and stuff and salespeople that reported to me. That was awesome to learn that side of like big company product management. And so, I, in a very bored fashion, I don't even know what the catalyst was, but I started posting on Twitter in the fall of 2019. So I'm like the definition of a late adopter, I think, to all technologies. My neighbor sent me a TikTok the other day, and I looked at my wife. I was like, "Should I download TikTok?" She's like, "Well, you don't have TikTok on your phone." I was like, "That's true. I've never once downloaded it. I've never used it." So I'm like,
might as well download it.
I'm a late
A week
social
before it
adopter that like teaches
disappears.
other people how to be good late social adopters, I guess. But um, yeah, so in 2019, I just started, Logan Bartlett, who's at Redpoint, and Balaji and Eli Gill and all these different investors, some of whom I knew from conferences and raising money from them and just seeing them out and about. They all, a lot of them had this very like serious tone on Twitter. And I just thought it was like really funny to just go into Naval's like tweets and like say something sarcastic because his following is so like, they're, so like kind of like Chinese cookie fortune, advice, I think. But people just deeply love it and love him. And I thought it was kind of fun to like piss off, his following and a few other people's followings, not in like a malicious way, but just in sort of a playful way. And then I was doing that I think if I remember correctly, I actually looked at this a couple years ago. Like I think I had sent like 130 or 150 replies, all replies to like people in tech in late 2019. COVID happened then, and I was still working at Indeed. So now I'm like a very bored year 3 of 3-year earnout tech executive who like literally cannot get fired. And I'm working from home and there's nothing else to do. And so now I'm just like, now I'm tripling down on Twitter. I'm starting to post my own stuff. I started in that era of like early 2020 in the whole like Wikipedia summary, bro. Like I was one of those guys like summarizing interesting Wikipedia. It's funny if you go back, you can sort all of my old tweets. I look back at some of them and I'm like, I started as the person that I now loathe on Twitter, but that's how it often goes. But and like it was just crazy. Even though then I had literally a couple thousand followers in 2020, and then it really started picking up. I think by 2021 was the first time that I went to like a conference and I was talking to somebody and he was asking me, this is summer, I think of 21. He was like asking me about Twitter stuff. And I was like, yeah, I use it. And I was giving him the good, bad, ugly of a bunch of groups and stuff that I followed. And at the end, he's like, oh, what's your name? And I was like, oh, Chris. And he's like, oh, let me follow you on Twitter. And I pulled up my phone and to like put in my like username so you could follow me. He's like, dude, Chris Bakke, like I already followed you, man. And I think then I had like 30 or 40,000 followers, but I was like, oh, it's a massive community. I mean, there's millions and millions of people in tech, but this tech Twitter community is actually kind of small. And it's like cool. I was like, cool meeting this guy in real life. And we had this like crazy afternoon at this conference where we like played pool and we got lunch together. We were just chatting about all this different stuff. And we had no idea really like, and he was like a very successful founder as well. So that was kind of fun. I was like, oh, wow, there's like there's real people behind these accounts. There's a real network here. There's actually like, these things are influential in the same way that I think about Naval's like, cookie cutter tweets. Other people think about my stuff from time to time and I can rile them up or make them angry or make them laugh. And that's kind of fun. And so then when I started Laskie right after leaving Indeed, I just took it super seriously. I was just like, this is a growth channel. I've now met several CEOs in the wild that follow me. We're selling to founders. Like, I need to build a brand here. And so that was those 2 years of running Laskie was sort of the path from like 30 or 40K to like 200K on Twitter.
Wow. And so you start Laskie in the middle of the pandemic. You're having fun on Twitter. You vested. You say goodbye to Indeed.
Yep.
And now you're. How did you come up with the idea for Laskie?
It was like a painful, man. That was a painful time too. Thanks for bringing it up. No, I'm just kidding. I'll tell you, this is such like a funny part of my career. And I don't think I've ever told this story anywhere. Like, so this will be fun. Like you build something and you kind of move on from it, I think, in a lot of ways. Like there's been so many founders that like will build these legendary things in different spaces. Like, Elon's probably like the best example, but I mean, there's tons of people like, like Rich Barton, who was my first boss's boss at Zillow. Like he created Zillow, but he also created Expedia. He also created Glassdoor. He like a lot of these serial entrepreneurs, they create like very unrelated things. And I think it's like, you couldn't bother Rich Barton to like think about creating the next Zillow after he's already poured 20 years of his life into creating Zillow. It's just like, I know the entrepreneurial mind, I think for me at least, and for a lot of people, is sort of like you want to try to push the limits on different things. And once you've done something for, a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years of your life, you're just like, the next thing's got to be different or I'm going to go crazy. But what you don't realize, what I didn't realize was like, you're giving up just massive numbers of, I know who all the customers are in the HR tech space. I know who all the investors are. I know I know who all the competitors are. I know who's doing well and who's doing not, like which companies I can go poach talent from and which ones I should stay away from. You know everything about the space. And you're like, man, like, do I really want to play life on hard mode? Like, do I really want to play work on hard mode? And so I think that so many people, I'm one of them, like you fall into this trap of, good or bad, of just like, you create multiple companies in the same space because you just know it. You're like, man, I can save literally a year of pain by just going back and basically building the same company. And so that's sort of what we did. It was very accidental, but it was like, I had big hopes and dreams in 2021 of like creating like a defense tech company. And I was like, oh man, this is going to be hard. What's not going to be hard is just creating the exact same company that I just built. um, and I mean, down to like, I worked with the same co-founder. Um, five of the first angel checks that we raised were like the five biggest backers of Interviewed. It was easy to raise money. It was easy to hire. Six of the nine people that worked at Interviewed when we sold came and worked for us at Laskie. So it was just like, we're getting the band back together. It's the same team. It's the same engineering team. We know the customer. And that the sort of slight iteration was, we're going to build like a talent marketplace, or at least like tools to help recruiters find talent quickly. So kind of like recruiting automation, SaaS. And yeah, it was really fun. I mean, it grew super, super fast. I think we went like 0 to 5 million in 18 months or something. And then we didn't. And then it was like everything sort of plateaued and revenue actually went down a lot. And we had some like really hard lessons about like how to rebuild from there. So yeah.
Wow. And so this time, so you're in the same market, working with the same team, same backers. You have all these amazing lessons that you learned. And how did you approach the go-to-market in the beginning? So you're building Laskie as talent marketplace or talent marketplace and tools for recruiters. How did you get your first customer there?
Yeah, that was, I remember them very vividly. Our first customer was a company called LoadSmart, which was like a Series D company. And this goes back to the network. Their head of recruiting used to be the head of recruiting at a big customer of ours that Interviewed. So I started by just literally going back to the drawing board. Even though in those 3 years that I was in Indeed, a lot of people had switched companies, it's all about building the relationships with the people. So that's what I sort of said earlier, of like, we pissed off some of those people, which I regret, but the ones that we didn't, and the ones that got it and were supportive or understanding, I went back to them and was like, hey man, I'm back at it. Let's do something here. And so it was I would say it was very not painful to get to the first million. I think that happened super quickly in like 6 months, because that was all founder led, and it was just me pinging my network and getting, $1 million of the 2.5 million that we had at Interview basically back on the platform. And then in parallel to that, and I think very importantly, I was like, oh, I'm going to run the same playbook again. I'm going to cold email everybody. I'm going to hire people to do it this time. So I hired 3 sales reps. Just didn't work. I was like, wait, what? I was like, is this thing on? How do we do like a reset here? Because I was like, all right, well, the painful thing about Interviewed was like, I just sent thousands or tens of thousands of cold emails myself. In this time at Indeed, I had 120 sales reps that were working with me and selling our products. And I was like, oh yeah, you could just pay people to go and do this. That's what I'm going to do the second time around. So I did that. I hired 3 really talented, really amazing salespeople. And I sort of just ignored it. But every week for, the first several months, they were just like, yeah, this isn't working. Like, we're using your templates. We're trying our own templates. Just like, I think email deliverability in those 3 or 4 years had become so challenging in that space. People were just like inundated, and all these like email automation companies and tools are popping up. And so the saving grace there outside of my network was just like, I could talk about Laskie on Twitter, and every time I would talk about it, we would get 8 new leads. And then I'd go, well, this is sort of growing linearly. If I want to get 16 more leads, I got to have better content and or double the size of my audience. And so I just became obsessed over those years of like, this goes from like a playful thing where it's fun to meet people through Twitter to like, if my numbers go up, it directly is attributed to leads coming in. And we were selling to, mostly founders directly. And so like building like a founder brand of other founders was super important. And then I think the flip side of that actually became, there was a point, two and a half years in there where when we were doing 5 million, where I was like, dude, I can't get off the treadmill. Like now we have a team of 50 people and $5 million in revenue, and we've raised $6 million. And if I stop tweeting, this entire thing goes to zero, which is kind of the other side that you don't really think about when you're doing a channel and it's founder led and you're just like, oh, it's working, but there's not really seemingly a way to autopilot this. Like this, I have to be posting. Nobody else on our team was really like big on LinkedIn or Twitter. So it's not like we had any diversification. And then there became massive platform risk, which is like, if I piss off LinkedIn or worse, Twitter, and my account just gets deleted off the face of the earth, like we would go, I think we were doing, there were months where we were doing 50 or 60 inbound leads with a $40,000 ACV product from my personal Twitter.
Not bad.
Not bad, but pretty risky from like, we were closing, 25% of those, but not crazy numbers. We had a month or two in there where we closed like net new, I think $500,000 or $600,000 in ARR per month. We were adding incrementally in a couple of those months just from Twitter, my personal Twitter. But it's awesome, but it's also terrifying.
That's incredible. Yeah, I hear you. I mean, there's definitely that channel risk of, what if the algorithm changes or it gets shut down or, but it's such it's like, it seems like it was definitely worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it clearly was. I mean, I think, we hired agencies. We tried to get good at a lot of the other stuff. We tried paid ads. We gave SEO we kind of gave SEO and paid ads like a half-assed crack, but we put some real money into them. We gave them each like many months. We tried different iterations of the sales team. We moved 2 of the sales guys over to partnerships. We tried partnerships. I learned all about affiliates. We actually started to see some light at the end of the tunnel and some good leads coming in from affiliates and from referrals. We tried all of the like page 1 Google stuff about like just cleaning up our presence and getting good G2 reviews and all these things. Like we saw some good lifts from there, but 70 or 80% of it was just like LinkedIn and Twitter. Yeah.
And as you were, so it sounds like, okay, so Bakke interviewed founder-led grit and founder-led grinding of outbound, showing up door to door. That worked really well. Now, you realize at Laskie, okay, the game has changed. Do you think if you had been doing that playbook yourself, it would have been different than with the 3 reps? Like, do you think it was the industry changed or the channel changed, or you weren't doing it individually?
I think it was probably a mix. I think that I think the channel for sure just got really, really crowded in those 3 years. Like we effectively, we started talking to Indeed, like I said, in late 2016. We sold the company mid 2017. We were doing the M&A deal for a good 2 or 3 months there. So basically assume that like 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 4 years had sort of gone by before we started Laskie in early 2021. And I just think, outreach.com, HubSpot had added tons of email automation. I think everybody really during that period, they fully, everybody in sales are like pretty late adopters. So like Aaron Ross wrote Predictable Revenue in 2010 or 2011. I think it honestly took until 2015, 2016 to implement. And basically what that book is about like how you should set up your business to be similar to Salesforce, with like marketing plus SDRs plus AEs plus outside sales. And every Series A, Series B company was doing that. I mean, I think of like, from a cold
Yeah.
email perspective, one thing that I think about all the time is like, we by no means were in an early batch of YC. We were summer 15, so YC had been around for 10 years. Those batches were tiny. We were like the second big batch, and we had I think we had 101 companies. But the batches like right before us had 30, 40 companies. And the batches even before that had 10 or 15 or 20. And so I think if you looked at, even just from a YC perspective, the total number of companies that had gone through YC at the point that we did was like 400. In those 4 years those 6 years between like when we went through YC 2015 to now starting in 2021, the batches had grown massive. And so, if you think about even just using the YC name with companies to try to get like leverage over email, I wouldn't say it became commoditized. I mean, I think even still today it carries some weight, but it's like it just got super crowded. And I think a lot of people were doing like email marketing courses and like teaching people all the tips and tricks for working. And they were giving up a lot of secrets. A ton of agencies popped up that were like helping you automate and send high volumes of cold emails. Like I said, tools like Gong and Outreach were raising tens, hundreds of millions of dollars to help you automate, this sort of outreach and meetings pipeline. So I think it was the channel, but I think for sure, to your question earlier, it was like it to some extent was those guys. I mean, nobody's going to own it like you can. I think it's totally possible to get something to a baseline result and then hire really talented people that take it above and beyond. But I also think, in fairness to those reps, like I wasn't seeing great results personally with cold email, and they were seeing worse results. But it's like, I'm not going to go down this like, this like lack of scale problem that we had at Interviewed again. Like if I can send cold emails and they sort of work, and they get worse when we hire reps, then like I think this is just a bad channel
Yeah.
fit.
And so how did you approach, like, so you went founder mode and decided content was going to be a big channel. Like what,
Yeah.
like how did like, that's kind of a dark time, right? With the team, you're like, fuck, this thing that's supposed to work isn't working. Like, what are we going to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think, it was a dark time in two ways. One was like, we the joys of venture capital were too tempting to resist in 2020. So that's part of it. Is like, I will say, I think I am bad to mediocre at like deploying venture capital dollars. I think I'm actually pretty good when it's other people being like, okay, you're raising 10 million. Here's how you should use it. I think I'm actually pretty bad for whatever reason against myself. So part of the problem here is like, we had to be scrappy at Interviewed. I think I almost felt the opposite of like, dude, 2020 was free money. We raised 6 million or 5 point something million at 70 cap, basically pre-revenue. And so I was sort of falling into that trap of like, I'm able to raise dollars simply because I've had a successful-ish exit and because I'm connected into a lot of VCs, and the VCs really like this industry. But there's no real reason that I'm raising so much money, and our competitors were raising far more than we were, tens and tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases all around us. And so part of the sales thing was like, I felt like I just deserve, like you do that math and you have $6 million in the bank overnight with no real product revenue, and you go, I got to go put this to work. I got to go hire the $20,000 a month agency to go do paid ads. I've got to go hire, some $12,000 programmatic SEO firm. I've got to go start, buying billboards and hiring sales reps and shit, because like we have 24 months of runway, but we've only raised that money because we got to go spend it. And if we're not investing heavily into growth, then what's the point of this money? And so the mistake was like, I didn't really test a lot of those channels myself before hiring. And so I just made like the classic second time founder mistake of just like, I have money, I need to go spend it, versus I have money for hard times. And
Hmm.
so, part of that like reckoning and part of that founder mode before founder mode was really, a thing, I think in 2022 was like, we built that team to 55 people around the time that we were, $4 or $5 million in revenue. We cut the team down first from 55 to 25, and things kind of stayed the same, kind of got better in a way. And I was like, oh, this is like a lot easier to manage. I have less management overhead. Everybody is like now in it together. Like we alongside of a lot of other companies in 2022 are doing layoffs. The market seems like it's heading for a recession. All this Ukraine, Russia shit is heating up. There's a lot of fear about like midterm elections. It was just like felt like a dark time
Yeah.
in that time in 2022. And so, and then, yeah, we ended up cutting a lot of sales. We ended up cutting a lot of partnerships, but like the numbers just didn't really change. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. Like it feels easier. I feel like I have half the burn that I did before, but like we're still able to do a lot with a small team.
And is
And
this, and are
so,
most of the leads coming from social at this point?
yeah, yeah. And that was a big part of it. I think we cut, we tried all the growth stuff, and I think we gave it a good solid run. And I think it was some mix of we hired the wrong people to execute. It was some mix of like I didn't try the thing before we hired people to execute on it. And I think in some cases we had excellent people that were executing in the right way, and certain channels are just hyper crowded. Like I think,
Yeah.
if you think about the recruiting space, Indeed and LinkedIn had been around for 20 years. They're just masters at the SEO stuff. And there's 100 other companies that have been around for 15 years that have been trying SEO stuff for 15 years. It was just like, I think we had great people working on SEO as one example, but like, I think the channel for us, it was similar to cold email. It was just hard. We were picking the wrong battles. Like we should have actually just been like, let's double down on the content stuff that's working. You know what LinkedIn and Indeed and AngelList and ZipRecruiter and all these companies don't have is like a viral TikTok personality. Let's go own that. Let's go own podcasting. Let's go own events. Like if they're owning paid ads and SEO, there's 20 other channels. I don't think we were quick enough to own those. I
Yeah.
think we were just like feeling blessed that like my Twitter and LinkedIn was driving so much from personal brand. We didn't leverage and invest in other creative areas fast enough. I think we just kind of did what we knew and did what we thought competitors should be doing, which was definitely a mistake.
And how did you know when something like wasn't working? Like how much time did you give it to say, oh, we got to stop working with this SEO agency?
I think I think that's always like a iterative process. The way that I generally would think about it is, I don't know if this is right or wrong. It's just how I did it was like, I think you kind of got to give everything a fair go. Like, I don't think there's ever in the history been any go-to-market channel that has really seen like even signs of payoff in less than 90 days. But I think most go-to-market channels, the way I would look at this, and I would recommend founders to look at this in some cases, is like, uh, a lot of times people come to me and they're like, dude, nothing's working on growth. And I'll be like, all right, like, let's talk about it. And they'll be like, well, we only ran like 3 demos last month. And I'd be like, something's working. You're right. How did, how did this happen? Did you email? And they're like, yeah, I tapped my network and I got 2 of them. And then one came inbound from this LinkedIn post that we did. And I'm like, oh, there's something there. Like, have you done 40 other LinkedIn posts? And they're like, no. Like, okay, like you tapped your network, like you pinged like 8 people and you got 2 demos. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, do you know more than 8 people? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, all right, go to like, so all of this stuff I think is basically to put a baseline around, get a demo in some way. It might be super painful. It might be crazy expensive. Maybe you have to pay, maybe you're selling a $5 a month product and you have to pay $500 in Facebook ads to get like a lead. But you're like, now I have a lead. This channel works. It may not be like working, but it's working to drive leads. Now I need to make it work for me to like get the cost down, to get the leads up, to like make something work to get ROI here. And I think every channel is like that. And so cold email was kind of like that for us, where it was like, it wasn't zero. Like it was like we're booking 40 demos a month from my Twitter off of like pretty low effort from me. And we have 3 salespeople that are all making $150,000 a year, and they're collectively booking 10 meetings. And so it's like, well, let's go
Mm.
do the thing that's less painful. And we've tried this now for 6 months, and like this one thing keeps getting better, and the baseline keeps getting, raised on in terms of like effort and money to results. And all these other things are stagnating, or they're going down, or they're not performing. Um, so that's how I think about it. And I think basically what you should do is find that thing. It might be the thing that's driving 1 lead a month or 1 lead a quarter. Try to improve the shit out of that, but also work really hard and really fast to go find something that can beat it. Because I think that that's like
Yeah.
your only way out.
Yeah. And optimizing it, I know you went really deep in optimizing it eventually. Once you decided, okay, we're going to double down on this channel of social that's working, how did you approach, like, how did that improve over time? And what were some things that worked to improve that channel?
Yeah. On the social stuff, it was I had to just get comfortable talking about the product. It was super uncomfortable for me because of the type of account that I had created. I felt cornered many, many times in running my personal account, which was like it was and is to a certain extent like a very like jokey, memey sort of shit posty account. And so it felt weird. It was like it wasn't a parody account. It actually was sort of my real thoughts and unhinged ideas and whatever. But like to some people, like I still see people being like, "Oh, Chris like runs a parody account," and I'm like, like it shouldn't bug me. It kind of bugs me that people feel that way because it's not what I intended. But knowing that so many people thought that was like, dude, the last thing that you want is like, if you're following somebody, the last thing you want them is like shilling stuff, especially if you're following them for humor or for a joke or for like hot takes or like, it just feels like that's a hard line. And so I think for months I was just like a little bit paralyzed, where I was like, I gotta just keep posting and we'll find some way through this. And then I kind of realized like, I think you can have this balance of like, I don't know if it's a perfect balance, but as an example, I think you can just have this balance of like, 5 posts about something random and then 1 post about your company, and that balance people don't mind. Like I think if it's the other way around, people might mind it if you're just constantly self-promoting and you're shilling and you're saying sign up and check this thing out. But I don't know, I think social media users are brutal depending on the platform, but they're actually overall pretty understanding, at least on Twitter and LinkedIn. I think other channels like Reddit are like much harder to self promote. But I think if you pick the right channels and you just try to be more altruistic and like give back more than you take, like people are fine with the occasional newsletter plug or the podcast plug or the demo plug or the here's what we've been up to plug. And so I think it took me many months to get used to that. But once I got used to it, I was just like, cool. If now like mentally I think my audience is okay with 1 in 5 tweets being about Laskie, I just need more tweets. I just need more at bats. That was literally how I thought about optimizing it. I was like, right now I'm half-assing this and I'm so paralyzed because I'm like, oh my God, like I can only sneak one little thing in maybe a week here, but I'm like, I'm only tweeting 5 times a week. What if I start tweeting 5 times a day? Then I get like a daily Laskie post. That'll boost numbers, and it for sure did. And then it's like by being more active on these platforms, the algorithms reward you. You get more views. More views mean your tweets get recommended more. So like if you're in the game and the game is kind of working, I've found it's social and Twitter and LinkedIn is 2 of the possible social channels, but even like TikTok or YouTube Shorts or podcasting, it's like it's kind of a binary thing. Like you either are seeing the results or you aren't. If you're seeing the results, like you're in rare air. Actually, most channels don't work for most companies, so find a channel that kind of works and just go crazy with it. And so I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
founders that come to mind that are like doing a great job of that, of like going crazy. It feels like a lot as a user, but they're actually doing the right thing by being super, super active.
Wow. So it was like sort of how hard you went on email is now social.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
like,
it's a good way of
this
looking
is
at it, for sure.
the counting the cars to taking pictures
Yeah.
of the offices to now like coming up with great content, which is really hard. But you figured it out. And so now Laskie's growing. You're at 5 million ARR. You said you're about 50 people down to
Yeah,
25
we're like
people?
50, I don't know, 45 or 55 people, something in there, around 50, I think, between basically all of our full-time people, which was split like probably 35 people in the US and then 15 or 20 people, mostly in Buenos Aires, but kind of spread throughout the world, in London, in Brazil, 3 in Philippines, Colombia, Mexico. So it was sort of all Canada. It was all over the place along the way, but mostly pretty like US and Argentina focused.
Mm-hmm. And so you're going, you've seen this movie before. You've already built a very successful company, had a successful exit. You're at double the size now. How are you thinking about growth from here? Are you thinking about selling the company, doing your Series A? What were you thinking at this point?
When you're in the good times, it's hard to know that you're in the good times, and when you're in the bad times, sometimes it's hard to know that you're in the bad times, and that in either way, all good or bad things do come to an end. And I think that that is what was interesting about Laskie, and about, I think, it'd be interesting, like, you should talk about this from your perspective of, like, I think I had mentally set, even though it's sort of twisted, like, I was like, dude, starting a company in 2020 did not necessarily feel easy at that time. Like, the world is still shut down. There's massive turmoil in the jobs market. Like Delta, United, all these people are like furloughing 60,000, like stewards and stewardesses and pilots overnight. And, the government sending free money to everybody because nobody can survive and there's no grocery. It's like, this actually, in a way, it kind of felt like I was like building a company in hard times mode, but it wasn't, because of the interest rate stuff that was. And so it was
Yeah, it
this
was so
weird, like,
weird.
dystopian thing of like, I was like, dude, we're building a company to 5 million in the hard times. And then it's kind of like one or two little things change. And then you're like, oh no, that was the easiest time in the last 20 years to build a company. And for us, not true with all industries. There's plenty of companies that really did have truly hard times during that. But we just picked this like meteoric rise of, there's this crazy remote talent shortage. Any company will pay any amount of money to make good hires during that time. Super, super, super supply constrained. So if we can find the supply, we're literally printing money, which is what we did. And then there's all these, I remember vividly going to we had sort of co-lead investors in that $6 million seed. I went to one of them, who's like a neighbor of mine here in Danville. And I was like, dude, we're at 5 million. This is, I think February of 2022. I could have that wrong, but I think it was February, March, 2022. I'm like, the good times are continuing. This is great. 5 million in revenue. There's no stopping us. We want to raise like a $20 million Series A. And he was like, you should not do that. And I was like, it's kind of like a mean thing for like an investor who's already put in like 3 million to be like, no, this is a bad idea. And this guy, I'll give him a shout out, Jason Friedman from Peak State, just had this like insane view on the world at this time. Like, we're like 2 days into the Russia-Ukraine war at this time. And he's like, no, the Russia-Ukraine thing is going to be really bad. And it's just going to totally fuck the market. And everybody's going to have to do layoffs. And it's going to take like 60 days plus to raise this A. And you're going to get halfway through it and just get fucked on terms. So you should just, like, because you guys are in a good place, you should just sit this one out. And I remember like leaving his house being like, this guy's an idiot. And then like, it was just, I was like full speed ahead. I was like, we're going to find the co-leads. We're going to get the existing investors to sort of give us a list of all the people that we should raise from. And then it was like within 5 or 7 days of that, I remember being like, this is great advice. The world has like literally turned upside down in like 2 weeks. And
Wow.
I was just either not head above water enough. And so I don't know, like, I think we were just like full speed ahead with growth coming into 22. And we didn't know that we were exiting good times and heading into bad times. That was like just super not clear, I think, when we were like going through it then.
Wow. And so when you were like forecasting for 22, at this point, yeah, how were you thinking about growth for the company? Were you setting a revenue goal, a fundraise goal?
Yeah, I think we were definitely setting revenue goals. We also set a fundraise goal. I was hiring people in late 2021, at least two pretty senior people, where as in their offer letter, I was like, your salary is $150,000 a year, but we're going to move it to 200,000 as soon as we raise more than 15 million. Like 15 million was like the lowest Series A you could possibly fathom in 2021. We had gone from, 0 to 3 million or whatever over that first year of business, or maybe 0 to 2, I don't know. 0 to many millions in ARR in the first 12 months. And then 6 months later, we had added another 3 million. And so it was just like, we are unstoppable. So the 2022 planning, which we did, was just like, I don't even remember, but the numbers were big. We
Hmm.
were going to at least double, maybe triple over that year. We probably netted 2022 out by being down 40% in revenue for the start of the year. So it's like, so then it got into like the depressing thing of like, we like did this model where we start at like 5.1 million in ARR. We're trying to, I don't even remember what it was, double, triple. We're trying to get to 10 or 15 because the all numbers only go up. And then it's like, we're ending the year at like 2.5. Like something's gone very wrong. And then we basically spent the first several months of 2023 like rebuilding and doing a second round of layoffs. We cut the team from 25 down to 15. And that was like when the founder mode stuff was super clear. Like, you got to do what you got to do to survive. I was checking like layoffs.fyi every day. I was seeing companies that I had invested in that I didn't even know that they had done a big round of layoffs on that list, and being like, just all of my investments are going to shit. Every big tech company. I mean, so like in terms of the forecasting then coming into 23, I was, you're like, well, if you have a company with 2 or 3 million in revenue, can always sell it back to Indeed. So I remember talking to my old boss at Indeed in early 23, and he's like, yeah, man, this is it's pretty bad timing. We haven't announced it yet, but we're gonna lay off like 3,300 people next week. It's like,
Wow.
so to be clear, you're not gonna pay us $50 million for 15 people anymore. Like that deal's off the table. So
Oh man.
yeah, it was just it felt like, I think the honest truth is like, I haven't seen it talked about enough, but I think the right word for it is stuck. Like, we felt stuck in 2022, and stuck is like, revenue now has stabilized, but it's not going up very fast. So we don't feel venture scale anymore. The whole Series A market is fucked. So we feel like there's not this clear next step of like, oh, if we actually had, I mean, even with a big revenue dip, we still had very good Series A metrics. We had 2 point something million in revenue from a really good client base that mostly was like still hiring through all the shit show. And then it's like, but we've raised too much. Like, we actually started by bootstrapping the company for the first 5 or 6 months before we raised venture. But it's like, man, we should have just done that. We would have had more control. I think, and that was a period where I think so many CEOs were leaving their companies in 2023, because it was just like, and early 24, because it's just like, what do we do? We got this, like, we're nowhere near an IPO. We're nowhere near the milestones that we really need. Nobody's buying companies, but we have revenue. We have a real team. We're not going to shut down. We are successful. So it's just that feeling of like, I think almost every industry had experienced this like insane growth for several years. And again, felt like hard times. It was actually easy times. And then when like the rubber meets the road, and like everybody around you is doing layoffs, and the public market sucks, and so none of the public companies can buy the small companies, you're just like, what do I do with this thing? It's now boring to run. That's like the feeling that I actually felt, was like, this thing is boring to run. This was really fun when everything was up and to the right, and when we were hiring. You fire enough people and you watch the revenue number go down enough, and you're like, yeah, man, this isn't what I signed up for. Especially as like a second time founder. You're like, maybe first time you're like, I'll do what I have to do to get through it. But second time you're like, I don't need this shit.
Yeah. You're like, why am I not on the beach?
Yeah. I don't know. For
Oh
sure.
man, it's brutal. I mean, that's like it's sort of like where, I mean, things go wrong all the time, and this is like the perfect storm 22 of like everything going wrong, and there's also like no hope, no one's buying companies. It's like super bleak, and it's just like it's super depressing, especially I can imagine you're like you've already had your success, right? You could have like stopped working, and like now you're doing this and you're like, I mean, I'm sure your head was going through all this crazy, like, what the fuck am I going to
Yeah.
do? And so how did you like, how did you, you know, you still had a very successful outcome, right? So
Yeah.
despite this like craziness and like big downturn, I think it goes back to your point of just like as the founder, you just grind until you
Mhm.
find a solution, and
Yeah.
and so what was that process like, and ultimately selling the company?
Yeah. I think I mean, it's 100% luck, but it's also like 10% you create your own luck, I think is the
Mhm.
moral of this story, the more I thought about it. Like, what happened with Laskie was Elon was buying Twitter around October of 2022. So he was in the same shit scenario that we all were, but with a much bigger problem where like he had, the Delaware court had held him accountable for a pre the world going to shit price on a company that had fully gone to shit in 2023 or 2022, I guess this is. So he's buying this thing that I don't know. I think, if you asked him or any reasonable person, it's probably worth 10 to 15 billion and he just paid 44 billion dollars cash for it. So you're like as like no matter how bad I feel, imagine being the guy no
Yeah.
matter how rich you are that starts day one like 34 bill in the hole and has to climb out of that. Like, all right, well, it's all perspective. Things could be
Totally.
worse. And I think that there was just, it was interesting. Despite that, I actually felt like from being super, terminally online during that period was like, there was weird hope. It was like maybe Elon will do some cool stuff. Like, oh my God, he just cut like thousands of people and the site's still on. Like, that's kind of crazy, but also kind of cool. And it's kind of hopeful for what other companies might be able to do, just like bad for the job market, bad for people, but like net positive from we're all learning to do more with less. And so I was following that and I was tweeting during that time period a lot about all the stuff that Twitter should do. And I felt like I had no place to do that, but I also felt like I kind of had a place for it because I had, yeah, I don't know, 150 or 200,000 followers at that point. So I was like, there's like people that really care about this platform, and I'm one of them. And I feel like if Elon's just going to be ripping through a bunch of ideas, and he was like super active during that time period, like just random friends, people that you and I know would be like tweeting, and he'd be like, okay, we'll do that. She'd be like, wait, what? Like, that's crazy. Like, yo, you should change this thing or this thing sucks. He's like, I'll look into it. And you're like, whoa, this guy's like, he's in the weeds. And so it was this crazy, like create your own luck plus luck thing of like, as I was tweeting about all these things that Twitter should do, one of the things that somehow, again, just right time, right place went pretty viral was a point about how Twitter is like the greatest hiring platform in tech. It's just nobody formally looks at it that way. I think if you needed a co-founder, if you needed like a killer engineer, if you need an amazing designer, even if you need a great agency, all the time, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tweets per month being like, I'm hiring for this role. Hey, does anybody have a good designer that they'd recommend? You see it across every country. Like it's like a global phenomenon. It's not unique to tech. There's construction companies and restaurants that are hiring on Twitter. So I was like, this is kind of crazy as a company that's starting in the hole 30 billion, 34 billion or whatever it was actually, like from a purchase perspective, like how do you climb out of this hole? One of the obvious ways is, Twitter's starting this whole process with like $2 or $3 billion in revenue and 600 million monthly active users. LinkedIn has 40% fewer monthly active users and they have $15 billion in revenue. So I was like, if I was Elon, I would get into the job space because there's just so much money there. And I was giving like very tactical things of saying like, this is already happening on Twitter. Here's how they should monetize this. I was just literally, truthfully, like in the back of my mind, I was thinking, this is going to be some sick partnership opportunity. Like if and when somebody randomly, comes across one of these, like we could power this infrastructure. And as we moved away from marketplace and more towards SaaS tools, I was like, this is a really good way to help us go like sort of David and Goliath, the LinkedIn's and Indeeds of the world with Twitter. And Elon was like starting to like some of those posts occasionally. And then there was one, I don't remember the exact one, but he was just like, hey, like we should do a call. Like, I think these ideas have all been really good. Would love to hear more. And he said, even in the original DM, he's like, I'd be happy to buy your company as part of this. And I think if almost anybody else in the world is like, dude, David, I love the work. If I reach out to you, I'm a huge fan of Fondo. I love all the work that you're doing. I'd love to buy your company. You'd be like, haha, yeah, man, like, but still happy to chat. When Elon does it, you're like, I think he's probably serious because like he just probably doesn't have time to like be dicking around with this stuff. And B, probably has the money to do it. And actually, if he just wasted $30 billion on purchasing this company, then like there's probably, some of it's sunk cost thinking, like how much more do you invest in this? But the other piece of it is like, yeah, I'll buy revenue at any cost. And so that was the conversation. The idea was, we're going to build a job matching platform. The crazy thing was like he fired all of corporate development. So we're just negotiating with him directly. And with his family office. And so, we technically were the first company merged into X Corp. Twitter was the second.
Wow.
Fun fact. That does not matter in the grand scheme of things, but technically that's how the merger went. And so, he like merged Twitter and, into X Corp. He added Laskie as a tiny little line item as like a glimmer of hope. And I think for what we were bought for, and from like a purpose driven perspective, there's days where I'm like super hopeful. I left X 4 or 5 months ago. There's days where I'm super hopeful. There's other days where I'm like, all of this shit should be a lot better by now. And I just, I have no control anymore outside of owning way too much of X and XAI stock and hoping that it's worth a lot someday. But yeah.
It'll probably 100x from here.
I'm very hopeful
I think
about
you're in
the
good
XAI.
shape.
Who knows about the X?
Yeah. So okay. So at this point you built Laskie to 5 million. You tripled down on content. That's working really well, and that even became the channel for this partnership acquisition, which is interesting because it's like these channels that you triple down on that work add a ton of value beyond even just getting that lead to convert to a demo, to convert to a sales close. So it's like the investment that you make in these channels actually has massive ROI. Like the outbound in interviewed ended up selling for 50 million to Indeed, and now growing Laskie to 5 million, the market completely changing, and that channel still bringing in a big win for Laskie. So you're there. The tweets are getting Elon's attention. He's engaging. He DMs you. What does that DM conversation look like? What's the first number that gets thrown out?
I think he was like, he had a very pragmatic approach to this, which was sort of, what do you guys want to get bought for? And then knowing like again, I'm sure the number could have been higher. He got us at a brilliant point of like, this is January of 2023. So the market is still dog shit terrible, especially in hiring and recruiting. And so he just caught us at a really good time, where I think if he would have caught us a year before, my answer would have been like, well, dude, we were just valued pre-revenue at 70 million. So I don't know what it was, this $250 million EV. I think, you eat shit for like a year and a half on revenue, and then somebody still wants to buy you at the end, and you're kind of like, I don't know, man. What do you? I'm sure it's not going to be a big number, but we'll take. And I think I think in fairness, we held the line really nicely. We were very upfront about like, we basically raised from these VCs at like a 70 cap. We want to do right by them. And so we ended up with a number that was sort of like around there where everybody, everybody made money or basically returned money on like a dollar for dollar basis to all of our investors, which was great. And then, the team did really well. We had people that, on the team that made like millions of dollars in cash because they got big grants and we did the deal, partial cash, partial stock. But I mean, it was really the valuation number was framed around the valuation of the last round, which I think it's not something that you were like taught to think about, but I also think it happens a lot more than you want maybe as a founder. I don't know. I think in some cases it can be good, in some cases it can be bad. If you raise a round at a so-so valuation where you're just kind of, you want the cash, you're desperate for the cash, but you're not thrilled with sort of the end outcome, but you're selling off a little sliver. Who knows? Like, I think in some cases when you go into M&A, people can point at this and go, well, we're not going to pay you 100. I mean, you just raised at 20. Like a 5x is a really hard sort of mental barrier to get over. I think in some cases it doesn't matter at all. Like the acquirer will just, the team is so perfect, the industry is so ripe for disruption, the product is so amazing. All acquisitions are hype based, so there's just enough hype around the company where it goes, this isn't based on financials or fundamentals. This is literally based on like, what does the founder need to stop working on this company? And so I think there's different types of acquisition, and I think ours was probably a mix of like fundamentals, like and also like, what do you like, working at X is going to be huge for your careers, but it's also going to be a different type of pain in the ass. And so like, what do you guys need to make that jump? So,
and what did you, going through that M&A process, this is your second time doing it. What did your like infrastructure look like for the due diligence process? Like, what are things that you did along the way that were helpful?
It's a great question. I mean, we tried to be, I knew that the outcome of any company from being an angel investor is you get bought, you shut down, or maybe you IPO. And I had seen a little bit of the latter, but a lot of the two former, a lot of getting bought and a lot of shutting down as an angel over the last like 10 or 15 years. And so I remember part of the Indeed transaction was like just so much document wrangling, like during the M&A, like we were slowing ourselves down. I said earlier, I think the deal took 45 days to close. Probably could have closed in like 30 or 35. There were definitely times where it was just like, hey, pop-up requests from their lawyers. Yeah, you guys mind sending us, all of the like 83B information from anybody who's like a restricted stockholder, including employees, because we gave a lot of like RSPAs to all employees. And then also like we need, fully executed contractor agreements. And by the way, we noticed that you were using like 5 different types of agreements. Any reason why you used it? And so you're like, yeah, the latter I can answer pretty easily, but now I've got to go wrangle because we never collected. Like, I think everybody I know, I have mine, but like we got to go collect all these like 83B agreements from people that have been fired from the company in some cases because the acquirer wants them. We've got to go double check. And of course, when you're scaling to, 20, 50 people very quickly, things fall through. And then you're like, oh my God, do we not have a contractor agreement in place for this guy? All those things are fixable. They just take time. And so with Laskie, even though we were growing fast, I was like hyper methodical about that. I was like, we either shut down and we have like the cleanest data room in terms of like bookkeeping, taxes, tax refunds, contractor agreements, NDAs that we've signed. Like I set up a pretty solid flow. Like mostly I was managing all of that like company level stuff, like all the taxes and accounting stuff we did with Fondo, but also even from like a hiring perspective, we used like one ATS and one HRIS for pretty much the life of the company. So we had like all the payroll stuff, all the healthcare benefits, all the 401k matching, like all pretty much ready to go. And I tried to do sort of like quarterly or end of the year cleanup on that stuff just to document. So it's like going into the conversations with Elon, I basically had built out a full data room because I'm like, look, whether if we dissolve the company, the lawyers are going to want all this stuff. If we go public someday, bankers are going to need this stuff. If we raise a Series A, the VCs are going to need this stuff. And if we get bought, the acquirer is going to need this stuff. And so it's like there's no reason to not have it. If you run a company for more than like a year, you will need it at some point to get to the next milestone, even if that's shutting down. And so, yeah. And so I was like hyper vigilant about it because it was so painful doing like basically just document wrangling. And we had shit across like, you work with a lawyer for 6 months, you kind of forget, but like he has the original agreements for some stuff and you just never put it into like a Google Drive or a Dropbox or a Box or whatever. So I think we were just, one of the things we got right as second time founders is we were just like always ready for the next thing. Like the books were always clean, thanks to Fondo. The taxes row was done on time. We had all of our like state filing info. And I just had I think like a Dropbox or maybe a Drive, and I just had folders for everything. So I remember part of like the Twitter deal went so quickly because it was like, Jared Burchell, who's like the head of Elon's family office, requested this typical, 27 initial items. And I had like 25 of the 27. I like literally just added him to this Dropbox and he's like, whoa, like over a weekend, you have all this stuff ready to go. And so that's super helpful when you're
Wow.
either raising money or going through anything that requires like financial or company diligence. So
wow, that's awesome. So what was your financial stack going into that due diligence?
just in terms of like, I guess, tools and services or stuff we were using.
Yeah, like what was to be ready for those next whatever the outcome is, what was the stack that you were using?
Yeah, so we were doing all of the like payroll and global payroll stuff through Rippling. Fondo was doing our bookkeeping and taxes and all of our like tax credit stuff, which was super helpful. So like, I mean, from a financial stack perspective, we pretty much had everything between those two things, like between like the customer sort of like login and portal that had all of our like historical, tax and bookkeeping stuff at Laskie and like the Fondo portal. And then from like Rippling, all of our contractor agreements, all of our severance agreements. We tried to run all of the like RSPA and like stock grants through there. So pretty much like and there were definitely times where like if we didn't have the folder right on, a certain month's financials or a certain contractor that we had hired, like between Rippling and Fondo, we were able to grab those super easily because like those two platforms sort of serve, I think, as like a source of truth for a lot of those sort of related activities. And then outside of that, we were doing, it was actually funny. We were doing cap table management, winging it out of an Excel spreadsheet, which I don't know. There've been a lot of, I won't name any names. There's been a lot of contention over, I will name names, but just like, I think everybody that uses, like AngelList versus Carta versus Pulley, they feel different ways about those different companies. And, I don't know, man. I think I was just too cheap to ever use it. So I like my lawyer and I think occasionally getting different members of the Fondo team involved, we would just do these like periodic spot checks of like, here's who we've hired, add them to the Excel, add their grants, check that against the remaining shares in the pool. And that like, I wouldn't say it worked fine. It was more painful than it needed to be, but it worked.
And so when you're working on the waterfall schedule, you're just like, I think this is right. These millions of dollars are going to these people in this way, and who double checked that? Is that just you and
Jared,
the lawyer?
Elon's right hand man, like wanted to see our waterfall, and I still had just a monster Excel file because I mean we had 70 investors on the cap table that had invested at 4 or 5 different valuations. Some of them had side letters. Like it was about as clean as it could have been, but it was still a shit show. We had 55 employees. We gave equity to contractors in a lot of cases, like full-time contractors. So we had, at the time of the deal, we had 15 or 20 people working for the company. We have 35 ex-employees and contractors, some of which who hit their 1 year, some of which who I felt super bad because I had to fire them. So I accelerated their share. All of that was in a spreadsheet. Yeah.
Wow.
It
That's a
worked.
beast
Got
amount
the
of
deal
work.
done.
It
I
worked.
wouldn't
Got the
recommend it,
wheel.
but I got the deal done. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. So I think that's a great place for us to segue to sort of like where we're at today. I mean, pretty incredible journey, Chris. I mean, it's this is you have the founder dream story multiple times. And so what are you up to now? So you're investing, advising a lot of companies. Anything you want to share about what's next?
Yeah, and I've been doing some investing. I did a lot of advising over 2024 that was really enjoyable. I have less time now than I did. We've added like 2 more kids in the last year and a half. So it's a lot of time with kids. And then yeah, I started a content agency, funny enough, like a year ago called Napa. So it's usenapa.com. Yeah, I think that we've been able to work with like, a handful of CEOs and founders and executives to, basically try to recreate what I did, which is tell your story, share interesting insights, do thought leadership, share advice, share memes, share case studies that have worked really well for your company. And we primarily work with B2B founders. And so really working on scaling that this year. And then coming down the pipeline pretty shortly, there's going to be a sort of marketplace, also bootstrapped, that will be focused on like technical writing. So technical long form blogs, internal documentation, newsletters, stuff like that, where you can get paired with a high quality technical writer and do that. So have a couple more things coming down the pipeline that are more like products that I'm going to be like funding and incubating. So I will say if anybody's made it this far into the podcast and wants to, is like, has a technical background, maybe has done like something venture scale, wants to work with me on a product, I have a whiteboard to my left here and a long list of ideas that I want to like, put some personal capital, give some time to. We'll be like assembling some small teams to go work on different projects. And I think a lot of these things are like, good, just classic lifestyle businesses. Like I think there's a lot of stuff here that I like that can get to $1 million very easily. We'll struggle to make it beyond 5, but that's like a great business to own and be a part of and to build. So some stuff like that this year too.
That's awesome to see. I will say, I've had the opportunity to work with you in a bunch of different ways, and it's been really incredible to see, see your story and see you give back and share that with like hundreds of founders. Like I've talked to so many founders who you've helped that have a big impact on their trajectories. I know you've had a huge impact on myself and Fondo, and so I would definitely, any founder that has the opportunity to work with you, I would highly recommend it, and would recommend everyone follow Chris at Chris J. Bakke on Twitter. Find him on LinkedIn. Really amazing resource. I think this recording that we did is I hope it has a lot of good impact on a lot of founders, because I think everything that you've done and your process and approach is a great example of how we can all get more customers, grow, and exit. So thank you so much, Chris.
Great, man. I appreciate it. Thanks, Rick.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna